and welcome to the WIHS Journal, Public Affairs from 104.9. I'm Paul Kretschmer. You imagine that when the 2012 Hollywood blockbuster Lincoln hit theaters would ignite a heated debate involving Connecticut's controversial Civil War history. Join Dr. Matthew Warschauer, professor of history at Central Connecticut State University, for today's broadcast.
Sorry to disappoint if you wanted to hear about Lincoln. Thank you all so much for coming. I get to look out and see the faces of many, many longtime friends and colleagues and co-conspirators. And so it's really a pleasure to see everybody. And I was just talking to Mariana and Rebecca and Sally and saying how many times, I can't even count the number of times I've spoken in this building, but I've never spoken in this room, right? So now I can die, Sally, right? So it's a beautiful thing. So it's 2012, and I'm sitting in a movie theater in Hartford, and I'm watching Steven Spielberg's brand new blockbuster film. Oh, I suppose we should move this along. There we go. I'm watching his blockbuster film, Lincoln. And this is a movie that is all about not just the Emancipation Proclamation, but taking Lincoln's January 1st, 1863 proclamation and turning it into constitutional law by creating an amendment, the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, so that nobody then can touch what he has done in the Emancipation Proclamation. This is what the movie is about what it took to pass the 13th Amendment. And one of the things you have to understand about this is that Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation of January 1, 1863 is done more really as his powers as commander-in-chief than as President of the United States. And you might think, well, but those two things, how can you separate those? I mean, he is Chief Executive and Commander-in-Chief all in one. And yes, that is absolutely true. But Lincoln, in his inaugural address, had made very, very clear that his goal as President of the United States and the first Republican president to ever be elected to the United States as Chief Executive, that his goal was not to engage in abolition or emancipation. And he had said very, very clearly in his first inaugural address that he, in fact, had no determination to do so, and in fact didn't believe that he had the constitutional authority, that the Constitution of the United States protected the institution of slavery. Thus, Lincoln's Republican Party wasn't so much an anti-slavery party as it was an anti-Southern party. And you, again, might think that that's a slight distinction, but it's a very, very important one. And it's one that many, many historians and many people who are history aficionados get wrong. They equate the Republican Party with abolitionism, when in fact only a portion, and in fact a small portion, of the Republican Party was abolitionist. Just the way that we look at political parties today, we know that most political parties have a left, a center, and a right. And this was very true of Abraham Lincoln's Republican Party. Abraham Lincoln was a moderate. He was in the middle. He was devoted to the Republican Party platform of the non-extension of slavery. He didn't want slavery to extend into the West. He was committed to that and wouldn't back away from that. He was not committed to the institution of abolition. He was not committed to the institution of emancipation. And in fact, in the early years of the war, one of his goals was to try and get the border states, those states who had not seceded, were on the edge of the South, between the North and the South, who had remained with the Union. Lincoln's goal was to get them to accept gradual emancipation, which is, you pass on this particular date, any African-American person born into slavery or born of slavery, after that act is passed, they will be freed by, let's say, age 21. This, in fact, is the way that Connecticut had gotten rid of emancipation, or gotten rid of slavery. They had gone through the process of gradual emancipation, and they started that in 1784. Connecticut actually doesn't get rid of slavery in its entirety until 1848. if you can believe that. And most people, they don't really know this history. And this is one of the things that the Civil War Commemoration Commission that I served on as the co-chair of, and a number of my friends, Sally was one of the members of the commission, my friend, what's your name again? George, my friend George was on the committee. So we had, our mission was to try to explain this much more complicated history of Connecticut's past. And so Lincoln goes into the White House not think he's going to emancipate anyone. And if he's going to do it, it's going to be through gradual emancipation. And in fact, the government is going to pay slaveholders for the value of their slaves. So it's going to be compensated gradual emancipation. And then the third leg of that stool is colonization. Send all blacks who have been freed out of the United States. Because Lincoln fundamentally does not believe that these formerly enslaved people and the American white population can live in peace together. This is his mindset as he enters the presidency. So by the time he gets to the summer of 1862 and decides, you know what, I've been trying to convince the border states. I've literally said to them, do you not see the winds of political change that are coming? This is coming, whether you want it or not. It's going to come. And they won't agree to gradual emancipation. And that's when he says, I must use the emancipation lever. Now, I mentioned that he did it as commander-in-chief more so than president, because as president, he didn't believe he had the constitutional authority. But the United States is now at war, and we've been at war for some time. And Lincoln decides, you know what? My responsibility as commander-in-chief is to save the Union first and foremost. And in order to do that, I must take the South's most powerful weapon, and that most powerful weapon is their labor force, right? While most of the white Southerners are off fighting the war, who is at home plowing the fields, growing the crops, providing the supplies to the Confederate Army? It's the enslaved 4 million who are in the South. And Lincoln says, I can destroy their economy in one fell swoop, right? Why wouldn't I do this? And that's what Lincoln does. So if you read the January 1st Emancipation Proclamation, it does not read like, say, the Declaration of Independence. It's not lots of flowery language about liberty and equality and freedom and human rights and the rights of man given to us by the Creator. None of that is in there. This is a legal document, right? It is a legal document explaining that as commander-in-chief, this is a war measure, this is a measure of war necessity, and I am invoking it as president. But here's the problem, and here's why the movie is so important. What happens when Lincoln is no longer president? Is another president going to come in and say, you know, that Emancipation Proclamation, that was unconstitutional. Lincoln didn't have that authority. I'm reversing it, and I'm imposing slavery again. Now imagine Andrew Johnson, right? When Lincoln is assassinated and Andrew Johnson comes in as president, he does everything that he possibly can to mess up Reconstruction and to enamor the South so that they will support him going on as president. Okay? So imagine what Johnson might have done had he had the ability to remove the Emancipation Proclamation. Or the other way that it could be gotten rid of is simply the Supreme Court. We have a couple of eminent judges here today. I know that they wouldn't reverse these things, but you have a Supreme Court that is still filled with a number of Southerners, right? Including Roger Taney, who had been the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court and the principal writer of the Dred Scott decision, which determined that no black person, whether they were slave or free, they could never be a citizen of the United States.
Dr. Matthew Warshauer, Professor of History at Central Connecticut State University, is presenting this two-part series. For further information, call us at 860-346-1049. 860-346-1049. Opinions expressed are those of the participants, not necessarily those of the staff or management of the station. I'm Paul Kutchmer on the WIHS Journal, Public Affairs from 104.9 WIHS.